Welcome in to the Low Man Help podcast. I'm joined today by a premier guest, the one and only Adam Mares from the All City Network with the All NBA podcast with his co-host Tim Legler. Adam, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me, man. Always good when we get together, when we link up, especially when we talk Nugs.
Yeah, we're here to talk the pride and joy of the Denver area for you, the Denver Nuggets. They are fourth in the West, I believe. They're on the climb right now. They had a tough one against Minnesota recently, but we're looking a little bit more big picture here when it comes to the Nugs and talking about really what their season looks like and what it can look like when they get to the end. So you're the premier guy when it comes to the Nugs. Just give me a little bit on this year. What have you liked? What have you disliked? What surprised you? Give me a little general overview of Adam's experience with this iteration.
The Nuggets season has been a little bit frustrating, I think, this year for the most part. I mean, we'll start with the good stuff. I think Joker is not only having his best season, I think he's having the greatest season of all time, or at least has like a conversation to be had for the greatest offensive season of all time. He's been dominant for, 5 straight years, but this year is a cut above. Russell Westbrook and him have great chemistry. That's another positive thing. You didn't know how Russ would work out, but it's fun. I've long wondered – you've watched this Nuggets team closely, I know, over the last 10 years, but I've long wondered what it would look like to have an athletic point guard next to Jokic, somebody who gets into the paint. And then obviously his passing, just feeding Jokic has been incredible. So those things would be good. And I even think Michael Porter has had an above-average season by his own standards, even though I think he's the same player. He's just doing it a little bit better, I would say, slightly better than typical.
Yeah, okay.
But the negatives really start, in my opinion. I mean, Aaron Gordon has been banged up all year, and he's a huge part of what they do. I don't think he's having a great year in large part because of injuries. He's missed a lot of time. He had a rough offseason as well personally. And then Jamal Murray. It's the story as old as time. I've been watching this dude, I think, for 9 years now, and every season follows the exact same script. He's miserable in October and November. December, it's like, all right, is he getting it together? And then usually January, February, March, he just ascends to the playoff form, and then he's great in the playoffs. That's usually the script. And this year it's been the exact same. He has had a very underwhelming season in a way that's put strain on the rest of the roster, in my opinion, including Nikola Jokic early on. Jokic was playing like 38 minutes a night in the first 2 months of the season. But Jamal Murray, to me, that's the negative, and it textures everything because when he's good, the Nuggets look unbeatable, and when he's not good, you're praying that Jokic saves him, and he does a lot, but they don't look like contenders until Murray's there.
No, Murray and Jokic in the two-man, I don't know what you do. I think I got like deep into it last year, and I've watched it for a really long time, just like you have. But like when those two get it going, the only thing I always talk about like a 5-tool big, the only thing Jokic doesn't do as a pick and roll partner is stretch the floor vertically as a lob threat. But like it does, Jamal's athletic enough when he gets downhill, and Jokic has such great hands that like even if you get it to him in the spot that you would get it to a vertical lob threat, like he's fine. So and everything else that he does in the two-man is just so elevated, and his passing and his skill, and especially for me, it's when he gets in the pocket, his ability to shoot the floater, he welcomes the floater. It's a shot that he loves to shoot, and he's so efficient at it. That's the one that I think separates him the most, because that's the one where bigs will shy away from it, or, low man help stunts, and it's like, oh, I'm kind of caught in this action, but that's not him. He's so comfortable in there, and his hands are so good. His touch is so good. And I think your partner Legler on the Minnesota game was talking about, we might never see a set of hands like his again in the league. He's really special.
It's those, you brought up two reasons why Westbrook works. The first is Jokic loves the floater, so he gets into that pocket rather than be a lob threat. Would Jokic be better with a 40-inch vertical where he could every now and then slam it on you? Probably, but I don't think he would be that much better, in part because he shoots those floaters like other players shoot dunks. I mean, he's that effective.
Yeah.
And it opens up the ability for a quick point guard or even a crafty one like Jamal. It opens up that opportunity to get to the rim and finish, or more importantly, to get to the rim and draw the big, and then you're dumping it off to Jokic for that little floater. And then you mentioned the hands. Westbrook, as great of a passer as he is, he's a little wild. The difficulty in catching some of his passes is higher than most great passers. But for Jokic, it's effortless. 90-mile-per-hour fastball over the shoulder. You have like a quarter-second reaction time, and Jokic just like makes it effortless, sucks the ball into his hand, and then finishes it. So those are the things.
He's so good. There's something about, I'm not as heavy on the Westbrook thing working I think it's
Really?
going. I think it's going well. Like it's
Yeah.
not going well, but I think you saw in the Minnesota game, like take the last two games, Sacramento and Minnesota. I think you saw when it works, it's going to work well, and when it doesn't, it's not going to work well. And I think
I agree with this.
one thing really is the swing factor that differentiates if it's going to work or not, and it's whoever the defender is that because most teams will put a lesser defender on like Christian or Westbrook or something like that. And whoever that guy is, if he's a smaller guy that Westbrook's athleticism can overwhelm and he can bully, Denver is going to light it up. It's going to work. If it's a bigger guy that Westbrook can't bully, it's going to be really, really difficult. Because if you just look at Sacramento, when they had Kean Ellis on him, he went under back-to-back ball screens in like mid-second quarter or something like that. And Westbrook under, we're given a shot. You're not supposed to be able to get to the basket. But because he's bigger and more athletic, like he bullied him into 2 back-to-back layups. Then you take Minnesota and it's Julius Randle. And Randle goes under those. You can't bully him through to a layup. And it slodges everything up. It compresses everything. And so like to me, if they have a matchup where Westbrook's athleticism can overwhelm a smaller guy, it's great. Yeah. If he can't, it's real trouble.
I love this take because, and we talk a lot, this is how you view basketball, and it's the correct way. The regular season, a lot of things happen, but in the playoffs, only a few do. Because you get into a playoff series and everybody says, okay, where's the advantage and where can we take away their advantage? And because Russ has one that can be taken away with an adjustment like that, then it's like, okay, well, is he going to be able to do the good stuff? Not if they can force him to only have to go up against this matchup. And so I know a lot of people, they're just going to sag off him in the playoffs. They're already doing that right now.
Yeah.
Your point is the one that I think I'm most concerned with, which is if you look at Russell Westbrook's turnover problems this year, Orlando, Houston, Boston's been in there. Yep. These are teams that have strong, long defenders, and our athletic defenders actually is just as important, I think. And so now all these tight windows where he can bully and get space and make the play, now you have guys where he's not bullying nearly as much. And the window for those is shorter because you have length and athleticism around him. And then instead of having 3 turnovers or 4 turnovers, he's having 6, 7, 8 and just not as effective in there. And so that I agree with you. Not every team has that kind of defender for him in a playoffs. And I think there will be series where he looks great. But if you run into a Houston, and they have the Amin Thompsons and the Dylan Brooks of the world, like guys that are strong enough to take the contact and athletic enough to cover. I just worry that that's where he becomes ineffective.
Yeah. So what do they do? Like, what do they have? And this is kind of like their roster. And Julius Randle, I think Minnesota, honestly, the Tim Conley Bowl, like Tim's 8-5 since he left. I always think somewhere like that game, like it means something a little bit more. And you feel it. Like Rudy's got his whole thing with Jokic where, I think Rudy respects him and Jokic like respects him a little bit. Rudy's always little brother when it comes to Jokic. And he's like, no, I'm going to do it. So like, it doesn't matter playoffs or regular series, but like they match them up so well. And you saw the Westbrook thing on the defensive end, and then Julius bullied him on the other side of the floor. So, eventually when I was watching it, Gordon comes back. Like Westbrook isn't going to be the thing that happens. I think he's going to be break in case of emergency in the playoffs. And if the matchup works, great. And if it doesn't, no problem. But it's really going to be Gordon. And then you start talking about that 5. Do you love that 5 when it comes to they're going to play 36 minutes a night and like it's Jokic? Is there enough around Jokic for that? Like, do you still like them when it comes to any series? Like we're the favorite because Jokic is with us?
If Jamal Murray is also with us, then yes, because that, as you mentioned, when they're at their best, there's no solve for it. You do need some spacing. Teams can overload, but those two can do so many things to manipulate you that you're getting A+ shots. And Christian Brown is not a good shooter, but he's not an atrocious one. I think that you can count on him, and he gives you cuts, he gives you offensive rebounds, he gives you some other things. So my answer is if Murray is there, I kind of like it. But here's the other thing that concerns me about Denver. I think in today's NBA, there's too many good teams. Not in a bad way. I'm saying there's too many good teams for you to go in and say, this is what we do well, and we're not good at anything else. I think you have to have multiple identities. This is our core identity, but we can play this way, we can play that way. And Westbrook is one of those identities that they've uncovered. And this has been the most flexible Denver's ever been, going to that style of play. Murray's off ball, Russ Jokic 2-man game. It works great. But you have to be able to go away from that at times. And I think you probably have to be able to go away even from Christian Brown or Michael Porter, depending on, or even Aaron Gordon, I guess you could say in some cases, depending on who you are. And so if Denver had one extra shooter, and the guy I always use for an example here is a Corey Kispert type who's like just knows how to play the game and can knock down threes. If you could say, like, in this matchup, we need to go to this identity that we've cultivated throughout the course of the year, and now we have a little bit more spacing, then I would say yes. But that's hard on a coach when we have 4 different identities. This is our core one, but we are able to go to these things when teams over adjust to us, and we develop that. It's never been a Malone strength, and at the moment they don't have a Corey Kispert. They don't have an option of a guy to go to in that moment, so they can't do it. So that's my concern with Denver.
Just a casual 40+% knockdown gravity shooter that makes like every single top lock and trail read really well, doesn't need to touch it. Like,
He's good, right?
Just one of those guys. Like,
but I mean, first of all, Corey Kispert is available. That's not a name of somebody that's like, oh my God.
You're more in the know than I am. Available for what? Everybody's available, like everybody. But I mean, what is he available for?
Well, I think, first of all, you look at, your hope would be that Julian Strawther would be enticing enough. Because I think Julian Strawther, he's 6'7". He has some offensive game. Do you talk yourself into a 6'7" shooting guard who can score from the floater, put the ball on the floor, and hit the three? I don't know that he's played to the level that somebody is like excited about that, he's definitely going to be that.
Yeah.
But I even look at it, and here's another thing about the development of this year. So you would hope that it's Zeke Naji and Strawther, and maybe you have to throw some small sweetener in there, but that you're really trading a win now player in Kispert for a win in the future player like Strawther, who has a little bit more height, and you think you could turn him into a tall Corey Kispert. That would be your hope. If he hasn't played to that level yet, then I think I would seriously consider Christian Brown as the dangle piece there, because he's a great player. You have both Christian Brown and Peyton Watson who are set to be paid at the exact same time. Even if you just think logically, can Denver keep both of those guys with the amount of money they have owed? It might be that you actually have to pick between one of those in the offseason anyway. And Christian Brown has been a very good player. He scored 20, I think, in 3 straight games before this last one. He can guard. He has size. I think he does a lot of nice things. So then does he become a piece that you could try to get him? Because he's another guy that's young. You can get him on a good deal. So those are the guys I'd look to move. The problem is, to do that, you would have to have confidence that Peyton Watson could replace Christian Brown in the configuration that we're talking about now. That, okay, we need a shutdown defender. He can play the 2, which I believe he can. But Denver hasn't invested in that this year, and I don't know if you can make that move.
I was going to ask you if you think Peyton Watson can even play in the playoffs this year.
I think he can, personally.
Because he got played off the floor last year.
Do you think he got played off the floor? He couldn't play in the first 5 games.
They couldn't put him on the floor. He couldn't shoot the ball. When he played in the Minnesota game, and this happens to guys a lot of time, when I always talk about the league as being a filtration system of every single level you move up, like the athleticism, you start looking your peers face to face, you're no longer an outlier. And so, like, to me, when I see him on the court, like, at every point before the NBA, he was an outlier. And so long strides into layups always like show me you've been an outlier, because, you get wherever you want to go. Like, you don't know how to change direction. So for me, it's always long strides with him. It's always like I'm reaching to try to get there first. I think about it as like in football, you just have to get to point B first. In basketball, you have to get to point B in rhythm and on balance to be able to transfer energy, whether it's like vertical or move it sideways. So like, that's like a telltale sign of you've always been outside the filtration system and now it's caught up to you. So I see that with him. And when I see the Minnesota games last year, like, Malone doesn't play games. If Malone doesn't think you can play, like, he doesn't waste time. He's not scared to play somebody 45 or Jokic 64 minutes in port. Like he doesn't care when it comes to playoff games. So like Malone was like, you can't play. Like, you hurt us this much. And so when I watch him, I don't see a lot of things that have really changed from last year to this year. So do you think he can play on the floor? And if it gets, 1-2 games where you're like, oh, I don't know, because they're going to be in a tough series like early on. I don't think they're going to be the 1 seed or anything like that. Do you think Malone's going to be quicker with the hook? I mean, he's got to play. He's like their 6th or 7th man, right?
If we think about it this way, I mean, he has to play at the moment, the configuration they have. But we were just talking about the potential of having to trade a Christian Brown for a shooter. I don't think you trade him for anything else. You trade him for a shooter. Does that mitigate what you're talking about offensively?
I wouldn't move CB. I wouldn't move
you like him that much?
I just think they need, like, you would have to be getting something so good back for them to get rid of him. Like, he's a real starter in the NBA. He fits with Jokic. He's a fantastic cutter. He's one of their if not the most explosive transition player they have.
He is, for sure.
Yeah, I think he's one of their better defenders. I just think like he's going to have to make catch and shoot shots. And sometimes, this is just like long stride, same thing, like filtration. Sometimes to me, it's not so much about the percentage, but it's way more about like when I watch you play, when I watch tape, like how do you catch the ball? Like it's every single time you catch the ball, are you catching it with great shot prep? Like, are you seeing these catches as opportunities, or are you catching it and then being like, oh shit, I'm going to have to shoot some of these. Right. And so like, I haven't seen with him, like some of the catches are really good where you can tell like before he's like, I need to shoot some of these. Like you can tell it's not where he sees every single one of them as an opportunity. So for me, I would love to see him get way more excited on catches of like every single catch. It's great shot prep. Like that would tell me he believes in himself more. But to me, you can't move him. Jokic loves him. Like you can just see the way they move. Jokic loves him. And I don't think you can move him. It would definitely be Watson for me that I would. And I think Watson, if you're talking about any rebuilding team that you're trying to go get a win now player for, Watson's the one that you could get people to drool over because he would be, you know what? Really good defender, super, plus wingspan. We can teach him how to shoot. No problem. We can teach him how to do this stuff. You could dangle him and people would be excited. So that would be the guy that I would way more than Christian.
If that's, I think I'm opposite on this one from you, just because I really like Peyton Watson's defense. I think it's a game changer. Well, whereas I think
he goes to block every dunk, and some of them you're just like, hell yeah, man! Like go get him. I don't know
how he gets it, and you need rim protection with Jokic, right? And so I think there's something to if you just extrapolate what the future could hold for him, if he's a true rim protecting wing, which there's not very many of those out there.
He is that.
And if he is that, then defensively you cover for the biggest thing you have to cover for as long as Jokic is on the court. So I project that out. And then I'm a little more optimistic about his offense because I think he's a good passer. One note that he has like he has like some things to him that I think could fit in the system. The thing about him that I always point out, he's the only player on Denver's roster that plays 5-minute stints. He's out there for 5 minutes and then they pull him out. Rather than most guys, it's like 7 to 9 minutes, depending on what the caliber player is. He plays these little spot minutes, and he might touch the ball one time. Yeah. So his offense, as much as it is robust, I just know for a young player who already doesn't have like one talent offensively that he really hangs his hat on, it's the hardest thing to do is go out there and maybe you touch it for a minute, sit on the bench for 30 minutes of game clock or real clock, and then go back out there and maybe touch the ball for a minute again. I think that's a tough thing. So I think there's something there. But I will grant you this. I just don't know. From a salary cap perspective, Denver can have both of those guys on the roster unless they move on from Michael Porter Jr. and try to split him into multiple players. But as currently constructed, you look at it and say they probably have to decide between those guys. If they do choose Christian, because he is further along, he has a higher floor. I think he's always going to be the player that he is right now. He's going to be, which is a good player. Yeah. And you move on from Peyton, maybe that's enough. Maybe it's Juliet and Peyton. I just know Denver needs more shooting than what they have right now. And if they don't get it, I have a hard time buying them in the playoffs.
You know who Peyton gives me vibes of from like back in the day of like this is during his Nuggets time.
Oh man, who? I'm
Jared
curious.
Vanderbilt.
Oh no, I agree.
He's got some Vando vibes to him, right?
Yep. Like and it was the same with Vando, where you were like, but he could pass. He played point guard in high school, and he can, and then it's like, hey, maybe, but likely he's going to get funneled into this narrower role where it's like those things won't ever blossom.
Yeah. I think so. Porter, I don't think you can move Porter. I think he's that him and Jokic out of all like the handoffs, like second spectrum, like filtered for volume, like number one in the league, been number one in the league for a while, 1.289 points per possession, like. The handoff vibes are just so good. And to me, I love like a big that can grab it, go into a handoff because they're like rolling Mack trucks coming down the lane. And when you get a guy who's a shooter that knows how to cut, like the points per possession, they skyrocket when it comes to that. I love their handoff game. I think that when I watch Porter, the one thing that stands out the most, also, he's a great offensive rebounder. He's in the top 50 in the league of offensive rebounds. Like he's a great offensive rebounder, second on Denver in offensive rebounds. But when I watch him, everything that he gets at the rim that's his own offense is not good off the dribble. Like he's really reliant on cutting and offensive rebounds. And then I always wish that he would just be a better cutter when it comes to reading screens. When he gets off ball actions and it's pin downs or anything, they run a lot of split actions. He sees top lock quite a bit, and he's never setting up these cuts. We talked about this last year in December. He's never setting up the cuts enough for me. He does it a little bit, but he's never setting them up enough where he's just like hunting these like easy buckets and like really being, almost selfish when it comes to these. More so he's trying to come off every screen, trying to get, I saw the step back against Sacramento that was just, criminal with Jokic, like being open on a pick and pop. But like for me, I think they need him. They need a little bit more optimized version of him. I don't need him to grow as like you're going to be pick and roll or anything like that. Just a little bit more efficient and optimized in terms of the things that he actually gets game to game.
But this is the thing with Michael Porter is it's not his first season. Like we kind of – because I want that too. It's just there's some things I just don't really believe in. And you mentioned – I don't think it's necessarily selfish. You'll love this stat. I think twice in the last – or 2 years in a row, he was in the 95th percentile or above on ATOs. And my theory on this is he's really good at the scripted actions because there's not a lot there. Like we're going to set it up and you do this and you come off and you hit it. But the moment it's in the flow of the offense and, there's a wrench in the system, or I had to read this, he doesn't have it. And then to your point, you come off, you have the trail defender, he's playing behind you to take away the jumper, and now you have a wide open lane to the basket where you might just have to draw. The only read you have now is, did the big step up on me or did he stay with Nikola? That's the only read you have to make, and he just can't make it. Part of it is he can't read the court, I don't think, as quick, and the other part of it is he doesn't have as – his handle is functional.
It's very loose.
But it's very loose, yeah. It's like not – it's not like dynamic. Where
he's like a baby deer sometimes when you see him with the ball.
And you just need you don't need a crazy good ball handler in there. You just need somebody that knows, like, okay, keep him on my hip, approach the big, and just read what he's doing. Oh, he stepped up, drop it to Yoke, it's there. Oh, he went to Yoke, wide open layup or short floater.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't have that. But he has all the skills for it outside of the handle. And that's what's frustrating is it feels like he should be able to do that. But we're deep enough into this, I don't think he will.
There's so many times when I see him getting a pin down and he's getting lock and trail coverage, and I want to see him just bust it around the screen, like put his hip to hip on the curl and like get downhill and beat the big to the other side of the rim, use the rim, go punch something on somebody. There's so many times that I see that. And then he ends up in, the one he had against Rudy where he ends up in like some fadeaway step through layup, or the one against Sacramento, some like step back. Like there's too many times where I feel like his efficiency just like isn't there. There's like a little bit of pop that's missing. And maybe it's the back thing. Like he's had a long road back in terms of like, recovering, and maybe it's just not there anymore. But there's a few times where I wish like there was just a little bit more to him.
Hold on. Let me ask you this, because you're the perfect person to ask because you've worked with NBA players. You've trained them. To me, this is my favorite thing to learn as a player. Like, I love reading the court and anything that comes with, like, all right, here's situational basketball and how you just read and the skills you need to unlock it. It seems like a more trainable skill than this. You know what I mean? Like, this is one where I look at and I go, I feel like this is a summer of here are the 12 different ways a team's going to guard you around a pick or a handoff, and here's the things you do in each moment, and let's just go over them.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's truly when I worked with Malik, like we would do film and Jokic would like pop by sometimes and just hop on. And so like talk through things like he was incredible, but it really feels like it should be something that with Jokic as like the guy he's played with all his NBA career, like that this would be a thing that would be really solvable, but it's not. And I don't know enough of like what they do or what buttons they try to push when it comes to him. But there's a few that just leave you wanting more just because he's got it. It's not because like you want him to do something that's not a simple action for him. Like he's just got it. But when it comes to cutting and offensive rebounds, like he's one of the best like finishers in the league when it comes to that stuff. Like he's 10th.
Underrated skill.
Yeah, I was looking it up. Like he's 10th when it comes to effective field goal, like in the paint. Like he's 95th percentile. Average dribbles for a finish, 0.8. Like, so he's, 16th percentile, but anything self-created, it doesn't work. It's either off offensive rebounds or cuts with Jokic. And I would just want him to up the volume of the cuts. Like that's where the high yield is. Like go get the low hanging fruit there. Was there any more excitement in Denver than the first year he came back? Cause he sat out the whole first year with the back. And then it was like almost like halfway through the year. He was like trickling back. I remember the Indiana game, like
Of course.
Indiana, like it was pull up three. Like, was there any more excitement for a player than his first year in terms of the Denver fans versus Michael Malone?
Shot making is so enticing, and we know he makes his shots look pretty. I get more upset at his misses than any other players because I always think they're in, and then you look up and he's like 6 for 10, and you're like, I feel like he missed everything tonight.
Yeah.
But that game and then the Sacramento game was right after that. I think one of them he was like 11 of 12, and the other one he was 10 of 12 or something. And it was back-to-back games, and you're like, all right, so this guy shoots 90% on tough jumpers? Like, all right, let's do it. The shot making was incredible. And to be honest, I'm curious what you think of this. Sometimes you have to work within the framework of what you're given. Mm-hmm. And Michael Malone was not handed a high IQ, tough, whatever, this kind of guy. Like, there's things he lacks that Michael Malone really values, and I'm sure it drives him nuts. But part of it goes, they restricted his like irrational confidence on his jumper a little too far.
You think they clipped his wings?
They clipped his wings a little bit too much. He needed them clipped. He was a wild boy for sure with his shot. But it's like they overcorrected, and I just think there's something too. You optimize Jokic's minutes. I get it. He's so good. You don't ever want a possession where you wasted anything. But at the same time, there's something to the fear Klay Thompson put in your mind.
Yeah.
And he took bad shots too, but it was like you just think he's going to make them all. I think Michael Porter's going to make them all in a way that Denver has never fully like optimized the fear he could put running off of a handoff and turning and just going into his motion, whether it's a good shot or not.
So I think my take with him, like, one, I love the irrational confidence for like the first couple of games when he came back. He was playing like 9 minutes, scoring 11 points. He was like, no, this is. There was a point where I thought in my head, I was like, this guy's like, hey, you guys think it's Jokic's team? Like, this is my team right here. Like, but there's something about, in the same way that I talked about long steps for Peyton Watson, like in the few guys that I've worked with, like there's a small theory that I have, like, when it comes to teaching shooting, like there's a few things that matter, like your plus or minus wingspan, like things like that. But one of the things that matters the most, in my opinion, is your torso to leg ratio. And when I look at Mike, his torso to leg ratio, there's a lot more legs there.
Really high hips.
And I don't know like the specifics. I'm just my eye looking at it. There's a lot of legs there. And there's something about like the way he moves and how much legs are there that just give me a little pause that he's ever going to be able to like make the dynamic movements like Klay would make, like to set up screens, to do things. And I kind of go back to that when I think about like him cutting, like if that's the reason why he's not a little bit more dynamic, or if it's like, basketball IQ, like you were saying with ATO stuff, or it's like a little mix of all of it probably put together. But there's something about the leg to torso ratio that makes me think like he would never get to that place in terms of being good enough on the setup actions and then being in rhythm and on balance enough on the catches to be able to shoot those shots. But that's just me,
But I think it's a good take, though. I think about this a lot, right? Like NBA bodies, we always joke about this on the DNVR Nuggets podcast because we're always analyzing guys as unique anatomical features. Like this guy has huge hands, or he has really wide shoulders, or whatever. NBA players have weird bodies. They almost all of them have some kind of like abnormality. So I think that one's true with him because he isn't very strong. And I think part of it is what you're talking about is like he has this fairly high center of gravity that like he's easy to throw off balance because of it. The all-time guy that you're talking about, though, of the mold you're talking about is probably Bol Bol. I think I have a longer torso than Bol Bol does.
Oh, there was a lot of big energy for Bol Bol in Denver. He had a moment too. You guys love your like outside the box, like
how can you not?
Yeah. You guys really love that. Yeah, when just teaching guys like changing shots in the NBA, like the first thing that I always get into is like you're gonna have your body is your fingerprint, and we've got to mold whatever the ceiling is that your biomechanical fingerprint can make. Like we want to get to that top place, and it's going to look different than somebody else and different than somebody else. But like, all the bodies are different, and wingspans, torsos, like all that stuff, it all matters. And you can't try to put any of like somebody's specific body in the NBA into this like one, box. You got to be able to mold and work around it because they're all unique and they all have their own fingerprint.
And every advantage, by the way, or every disadvantage creates an advantage somewhere else. Like, I think this is like the art of war. You go up against somebody more popular than you. How do you win the debate? Well, they have more to lose. You're not popular and they are, so you have to drag them into the mud to join you in your unpopularity.
You're like B Rabbit against the free world. Like, look at you.
Exactly. But I think it's the same with players. It's like, okay, you have this abnormality that weakens you here, but it gives you an advantage over here. And the more players like Yoke, he's not athletic. He's strong as an ox. Okay, we're going to make it a strong game then. Like, I'm going to use my strength against you and use my hips and all these other things. So there's an advantage.
He's art of war where he finds it every single time. I didn't want this to be like the Jokic pod because, you can go and I could go. Like, and the people that read Low Man Help and listen to this, like they know how great he is anyways. So it's one of those things where, yes, like we should touch on it in terms of he's incredible. And if anything for you this season is like popping from him, you've watched him his whole career. If anything's popping, like, please let me know.
3-point shot, which is obvious to everybody. But the one thing I always say about Jokic, I laugh about this because it's the number one thing people got wrong about Jokic back in 2016 and 17. They said you have to have a very specific team around him. There's only so many players that can play with him. Mm-hmm. I think every player can play with him because he has every skill, and he's the best in the world at molding himself to what your skill is. So we talked about it already, but to me, the Westbrook thing is totally him saying, you have an elite skill, you get to the rim really well, you pass really well. All right, well, then I'll alter my game now to be a recipient of those things, and I'm going to score 30 a game.
Yeah, he amplifies everything around him. It's pretty incredible. All right, last one. Who scares you the most? Like, they're obviously going to be a playoff team. What do you not want to see? Like, what the bracket breaks this way? Like, oh, damn.
It's tough right now because, Denver is still trying to figure out who they are. I think if you look at Houston has given them fits because they can be so physical, but I don't know if they have the talent to match up with Denver in the playoffs. Memphis, I'm not totally buying as a playoff team. Clippers have a lot of defenders. Here's the thing. I'm over the idea. I'll say Minnesota because Minnesota seems to have their number. As your point, I think Tim Connelly beat a roster not to win a title, but to just ruin Denver's dynasty. I think that was his number one focus. And then if they win a title along the way, so be it. So Minnesota.
I'm higher on Minnesota than anybody that I know. And anybody that I talk to, I'm higher on Minnesota. But that's a sidebar. Please tell me more about Denver.
So I think Minnesota would just be there, even though I'm not buying them as much. But here's the thing. The word is out on Jamal Murray. If you get physical with him, he really struggles. If you full court press him, he really struggles. Minnesota did that better than anybody ever has last year in the playoffs. They just bullied him, and it completely zapped him. So Minnesota, that's why I think Houston could be tough, is because they have the bodies to make his life hell. But then I look at the Clippers, and I just go, look, the Clippers every year, I fall for them in January. I don't know that they're going to be healthy. What I know is that they have enough defenders to throw at Jamal to really disrupt him. And Zubac, while no one in the world can stop him, he has a big body that at least knows the moves and the angles that he's looking for. So Yoke's going to still score on him, but he might be 4% less efficient against Zubac than he would against most of your other bigs. So to me, Minnesota and probably the Clippers. And then, look, I'm not buying the Lakers. The Nuggets have owned them. But I do agree with Anthony Davis. This is what the show is about on All-NBA with Legler today. I do agree with him that they'll never beat Denver with Anthony Davis at center. But if they were to get another big like he wants that can just put a body on Yoke, now I think they could. Unless Jamal Murray, of course, rises to the occasion. But so Clippers, Minnesota, and then the Lakers, if they were to make that move, I would say that matchup changes.
Yeah. Two things. You didn't mention Oklahoma City, which is interesting, and I agree with you on that. No, it's okay. It's okay. This is a safe place for you. This is absolutely a safe place. And then the other one is, I think you mentioned something that when I think about Denver and in the playoffs, and when I think about Tim Connelly in Minnesota and what you just mentioned about the Lakers, and the Lakers beat them in the bubble with that same strategy, there is something to the Aaron Gordon shooting better. And I think he's going to have to shoot it better over 16 games in the playoffs to be like, that works. But to the Aaron Gordon and the Russell Westbrook of it all, you can have two big bodies on the court against Denver because they're going to give you an opportunity, whether it's Gordon, Westbrook, or Watson, they're going to give you an opportunity to put a bigger body on somebody on the defensive end of the floor and not be absolutely terrified of blow-by drives or shooting. And if you can have that second big body out there because you have one on your roster that works, you can play it against Denver and you can give them something that doesn't doesn't get paper mache'd by Jokic right away.
Right. Yep. And that's exactly it. And I think those are the teams that can do that. That's honestly the calculation was that simple. Can you pressure Jamal Murray with athleticism and strength? And do you have a second big? And those are the teams that fit that mold more or less.
Yeah. I love it. All right. Adam, thank you so much for doing this. We appreciate it. I'm going to get you out on this. This is the lightning round. All right. So you don't have to think hard about this. These are not going to stress your IQ at all or anything like that. We just dive in a little bit. All right. So if you could have any player from the modern Jokic era, Denver Nuggets player back on this roster, no trade, no nothing. You just get them back on this roster. Who would it be?
This one's easy for me. It would be Chauncey Billups.
No. Did he play with Jokic?
Oh, you're saying that?
Yeah. So
I got you.
Any player from the Jokic Nuggets era. So think of the year they missed the playoffs on the last game in Minnesota. From that moment on till now, you can have any player back onto this current roster. Who is it?
I think it's actually somewhat easy that it's KCP. I mean, if we're talking about this year, I think it's pretty easy. Denver needs a shooter, but they can't sacrifice defense. Well, guess what? You've got one right there that's going to do both of those things. Bruce Brown would be probably in that conversation. And I hate this player. I actually don't like him at all. But if you just talk about molds of player they could use, Jeremy Grant is probably also on this list because, look, they could use a shooter who at least has some defense to him, but KCP to me is the easy answer.
Okay. I actually, there was a part of me that was holding out that thought you would say Hartenstein.
Man, I mean, look.
there was a part of me that thought you might say that, but KCP is a good one. Because
of need, right? Backup center in the playoffs, that's 8 minutes a game. But I love Hartenstein.
I would love to see them. Could you they used to go double big with Plumlee and Yoke? Could you see Hartenstein and Yoke just like prowling the court together? Like would they just? It would be like the Mighty Ducks flying V coming down at you. Like it'd be a lot.
Here's what's tough about that. Who also has great hands is Aaron Gordon.
Yeah, he's good.
Hartenstein has pretty bad hands.
Yeah.
On those types of drop-offs. And I just wonder if Yoke would have a lot of these drop-offs that are fumbled and whatever.
All right, next one. Voodoo Donuts. Overrated, underrated, properly rated.
I think they're terrible, so I would say overrated if they are not rated as terrible.
They are completely overrated.
They're gross.
They're awful. I don't know why people like them. Okay. All right. Most enjoyable Nugget season. You've been on the record about the climb is something that is so great. So most enjoyable Nugget season, 18-19, where they first number 2 seed, Jokic first trip to the playoffs. Big Portland series, like established that he was a man, or NBA championship season?
NBA championship season has to be number 1. But my other answer to this is neither of the ones you said. I think it was 2017, which was the year Yoke came off the bench at a certain point. The first month of that season wasn't fun because it was a little frustrating. But the Jokic breakout, we take it for granted. I know it's like the cliche to say. Yoke puts up 35, 22, and 17, and you're like, wow, that's amazing. That first year when he would have 22 and 11 assists and just these games, and you never saw it before, and he was doing the first over-the-back pass and the first behind-the-back and all these passes for the first time, that to me was as fun as it got because every night felt like opening a new present where you're like, what if he did this? What if he did that? And he did it every single night.
Adam, thank you for taking the time. Anything that Adam does, all NBA on the All City Network, check it out. The DMVR. I know you guys just hit 100,000 subs on YouTube. Really, really cool. Like you guys do awesome stuff. So everything you do is incredible. And when I worked with Malik, it was one of the most fun things that you guys were the guys I was listening to, seeing what the pulse of kind of the fans were, and everything is great. So thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Hey, and likewise, man. I appreciate you having me on, and you're one of the best out there, man. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Adam Mares for hopping on the pod. It's always awesome to chat with him. I've been talking with him since 2018 when Malik was working there, and Adam's just the best. Next, we've got Matt Moore coming in from Locked On NBA to talk MVP stuff. I can't wait to chat with him. He's deeply passionate about the award and a historian when it comes to MVP stuff. This is our conversation with Matt. We are joined from Locked On NBA, Matt Moore, talk MVP stuff. Matt, thank you for joining the pod. Pleasure to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I always want to talk MVP.
It's one of the things I follow your Twitter, and it's one of the things that I feel like every single year. I don't need to look anything else. No straw poll exists. It is only the Matt Moore Twitter and who he's willing to mute and what he wants to talk about when it comes to MVP. You're incredibly passionate about it, and you do such a good job covering it.
Oh, thanks, man. As a CBS Sports for a long time, I kind of had to make the decision of you can either not care about these awards at all and just kind of throw it out the window, or you can care about it a lot if you're going to write about it as much as you kind of have to. And so I decided to go ahead and dive into it. And what was been great about it is, to me, MVP is it tells the history of the league, right? I mean, the stars have always kind of defined the NBA, or has for decades. And so I think when we kind of look back through the history of the MVP, it really does tell a story of not only the greatest to ever play the game, but also those that were great, but ultimately not great enough because they didn't win a title despite winning MVP. And all those stories I think are really fascinating to look at historically.
It is. It's interesting to hear you say that of like a story perspective, because one thing I did want to talk to you about is this narrative approach of like the MVP. And it does feel that it's this big narrative thing that starts, the ball starts rolling of like, it's this guy's year, it's this guy's year. And not only that, but the narrative is created by the people that vote for the award. So it's one of those things that's like a little weird to me, because it is voted on by just the media, and the media really pushes the narrative. So how do you kind of parcel that in terms of you've been on, one side of it where you're really in it covering, and then thinking about, creating the narrative and then who's voting for it? Like, how does that work in terms of deciding the best player when it's not somebody in basketball deciding it per se, like in the actual league or the nuts and bolts of it?
Right. So first, best player, I think it's most deserving of the award, right? Because it's a resume award ultimately, because we do base it on this season and what you've accomplished. I think what's kind of interesting is there's a couple of things to keep in mind. The media has voted on it since 1981, but the media has not only shifted internally in terms of it's gotten more niche and it's gotten more broad, right? And it's always interesting to me because if you look at the roster of the people that vote for the award, you've got folks like the Stephen A. Smith, Kendrick Perkins, Mike Breen, right? Doris Burke. You've got broadcasters. You've got beat writers. Jonathan Fagan, who just retired for the Houston Chronicles, has been covering this league for 20 years. You've got well-respected beat writers who have covered this league night to night to night as beat writers representing their market for decades in some cases. You've got analysts that take a more analytical approach to it. You've got your Zach Lowe's. You've got your Rob Mahoney at The Ringer. You've got storytellers that work for these outlets like Ramona Shelburne and Howard Beck. And those people are the ones I think that when we talk about the narrative conversation, Howard and Ramona, and not to single them out, and it's not bad, because I think it's fine if you decide going in that the most valuable player is defined by what was the story of the season, because it is a historical artifact. And if you as a voter decide, for me, that's it, is that this was the story of the season. And Ramona's talked about that. I think that's a fine way to go about it because it's consistent. You have an approach, you have a lens that you look at it, and you go there. But we have such a diverse set now that when we say, like, well, it's a narrative award, that's mostly based off of the results, where it's like, well, it felt like it was this guy's year. And I think that does wind up swinging certain swing votes, right? But, like, the analytics guys are always going to be like, look, I can't get there. Like, his numbers just aren't good enough. I watch the games every night, and I know how good this guy is, and the numbers back that up. And you're never going to be able to tell a storytelling person, like, well, but the numbers say this. Like, they actually don't win their minutes with him on the floor. Yeah, I know the numbers, but, right? So everyone's kind of got their approach. And what you get here is you got 100 voters that wind up in a whole range of outcomes. And they've got their own biases, and they've got their own preferences. And that consensus, what I think is interesting is that there are these nexus points where they do wind up intersecting. Because if you look at the history of the award, it's one of my favorite numbers. The winner in all but 3 since 81 has gotten 95% or higher of the available award share. So the most points that they can get, they wind up getting and there's 2 ways you can look at that, which is, the first is it's groupthink. You guys just all decide on who should win it, and that's who wins, right? The second is that when you do the research and you break it down and you go through all of the factors, they all wind up leading to the same place.
Mm.
And I don't think that everybody does the work that I would do or did as a voter the year I had a vote. But I do think that people do put their thought into it. And that a lot of these people, even though I might not agree with their takes or their position or even their approach, but they do care enough to have gotten these award votes. They put the work in whatever they do to have been respected enough by the league to have that vote. And that to me is fascinating, that you can have all these different perspectives and then still wind up with a consensus.
The 95% of the award share is incredible to me.
Yeah.
Do you think that we're going to end up in that place this year?
Yeah, I think so. I'm always hopeful for a more split vote, just because one, I think it would be really good for assuring people it's not groupthink, for it to be like, look at this one, like it was really split, because it was that close. And this one I think is going to be very much the way this one's shaping up. Is it's going to really come down to a central question of how many more games does Shea have to win before you can't deny him. If Joker averages 30, 10 and 10 on 45% shooting from three, fourth in steals, he's actually not leading in most of the advanced metrics, which I think is fascinating. EPM, he's second behind Shea because of the defensive. It measures defense a little bit more accurately. But if he's got all of these kind of numbers in his favor, he still will have a wide swath of metrics in his favor. If he does all that and the Nuggets win 54 games and Shea Gilgeous-Alexander averages 30 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and leads the league in scoring, which he currently is, for a team that wins 68 games, how do you parse that? What number does Joker have to get to? If Shea wins 70, how high does Joker have to get to? Is 57 enough? Does he have to win 60? Do you not care? Because there's a lot of people that are like, it is an individual award. It is not about team success. And I go, okay, but if you go down that road, then you have to open up the possibility that there could be a player who is so good that their team is under 500 and he's still MVP. Like, that could happen.
So I guess my biggest question with all that and the award in general is there seems to be, how do you define value? I think is such a big deal. Like if you said what you were talking about before, like the most outstanding player, like this is the guy, but value, how do you define value? And is it more like, when I think about it and I think about most valuable player, there's two things that come to mind. I will go over one first because I want to save the second one for a little bit. But the first thing that comes to mind is it's not an indictment of your teammates, but it is kind of a little bit of like, the people that surround you. How do you bring value? How do you amplify them? Like, how do you bring value yourself on the court? Like, what problems do you present that need to be solved night in and night out? And are there solutions to them? And like, do the problems that you present to every other team that you play in the league, is everybody so scared of them that it just augments everything going on around you? And so like, to me, like the definition of value and where you fall on that, I would say like would bring so much of the thought process in of who you vote for. So when you think about the award and you think about the definition of value, do you feel that we have the correct definition when it comes to voting? And where do you stand on value?
I think everybody's got a different one, right? Because there are people that are just like, Joker's going to get a swath of votes this year because people are going to be like, I think MVP is the best player in the league and Nikola Jokic is the best player in the league. I don't think there's much disagreement about that. I think Bucks fans have a legitimate case for making the case for Giannis, and I think some Thunder fans would try and argue for Shea, but if you really press them, they'd be like, all right, yeah, I mean, Joker's better. But everybody's got a different definition of it. The one that I came to when I started going down that rabbit hole of that question is like, all right, you do have to define what's valuable for you. Mm-hmm. For me, this was the definition I came to. Who is most impactful towards winning? That to me is it. Because the point of professional sports is money. But after money, it's winning. Like that's what you're supposed to do in this league. It's like you're competing to win. So the stuff that you do has to lead to winning. If you average Wilt numbers and not like everyone's like Wilt numbers. No. Go back and look at the Wilt like 50, like those numbers, right?
Nobody's going to do that.
Yeah. But like if you did those and your team was under, again, it's a hypothetical. I want cases where I want my arguments to be the same across the board. I want to be consistent year to year in evaluating this. Not everybody does. Some people are like, well, it's a different year and you have to weigh this and this is different. And I find that to be problematic because then you'll go back on reasons that you took the year before.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned the teammates thing, right? A big thing for me, and this is it's an opinion and everybody gets to decide it. The reason I go against look at his teammates and how good they are, despite look at what he has to work with.
Right.
Is you're then punishing the guys that have made their teammates look good.
Right.
And I'm like, neither one of those guys put together the roster. They play with whoever they're on the court with. You make the best of what you have.
Yeah.
And then whatever the best you have, we measure those bests. And that's probably who's most impactful towards winning. Yeah. So that's kind of how I look at it. And I think that there's a number of different ways that people look at it from a most valuable perspective.
There's one thing when I think about numbers, and I always think like numbers, film, like the through line is process. And I always think like I want to find process. Like that's the thing that I'm kind of like driven by. And so like when I think about just the first example of, and I fall on the Jokic side when it comes to the MVP, but when I think about looking dead straight at the numbers, I think about the impact that drawing two to the ball has on their numbers. And so when Jokic draws two to the ball, it's most likely in a post-up situation where the ball is going in to out, and it's much more convenient to shoot a catch and shoot three or be able to cut into open space when the ball's lower and it's coming out. So and this isn't all of his assists. Like I'm not a, this is the only way, but like it does lead to more advantageous opportunities to get assists that he creates. And then when I think about the way that SGA draws two to the ball, it's most likely when the ball is out further away from the basket, and whether it's in like a pick and roll action and teams are blitzing or they have two up to the level, and his job is to get the ball to where the next person can play 4 versus 3 basketball. And if low man help is stepping up there, well, the ball's moving to the next spot and the next spot. So we're talking about hockey assist. And so when I think about the numbers for those two, I lean into like, well, yes, there might be more assists that are coming from those situations for Jokic, but SGA is still cracking the defensive shell and creating these advantageous situations for his teammates, even if they're not leading directly to numbers. And so I feel like it can get really dangerous to only go numbers or to only go narrative. Like it does have to be this like merge of all these things together.
Yeah, and I think that's why, I have to start doing it here in 2 weeks I go through every single possession when I do the final wrap up. And that's on both sides of the ball. And like, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to watch 7,000 kickouts from Shea out of the pick and roll to various shooters to see like, what does that actually look like? Because what you do get a sense for when you do that much film is you wind up being like, he's a really good passer, but like, man, like a lot of and it's somebody, it has to be anecdotal a little bit. You will have problems with like trying to process it all, but you do the best you can about, okay, I kind of notice like sometimes when he swings to the corner, it's a little bit too deep and they have to make the extra pass and the Thunder spacing is so good and that's good. But when Joker makes that pass, it's on target every single time.
Yeah.
And you kind of identify like the gap between them as passers. The good thing is like a lot of times what I love about doing that is, man, you find so much cool stuff that that people don't pick up on the first time. Yeah. I learned this with doing Harden because with Harden, everyone's like, he just dribbles and then takes a step back. And when you watch it over and over and over and over and over again, you start to notice like, wait, he's moving his left foot, like just like a small bit. Like he's just like, he takes one step to the left every time he comes back. And what you realize is what he's doing is the defender doesn't think he's moving, but he slowly positions himself where he's a half step ahead of you so he can get to his left because he dribbles right in front of you while moving his feet. And the defender is like trying to keep center on the body. But what Harden's doing is he's getting himself in an advantageous position so he can beat you because he knows that he wants to go left. And those are the type of things that like I love diving into. Yeah. With Joker, there's so many positions. Like he gets a ton of assists off of handoffs. And so you're watching all these possessions and you're just like, oh God, another handoff. And the guy, Michael Porter Jr. rises up and hits a jumper. Okay, cool. But then you notice like little things like when he decides to pick it back up and deny the handoff and how he judges how far back that defender is on his hip. And then like how quickly he turns and all of these like small details that show you how good these guys, the best in the league this season, are at what they do. Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned handoffs. Danny Green and I were talking about this months ago, and I sent it to Adam, and you're a Denver guy, so you'll appreciate this. There's something great about how Jokic's, thought process determines if you're allowed to play certain actions with him. And I told Danny, like, Torrey Craig was the best one because I worked with Malik, and so Torrey was there the whole time. So like Torrey would always want to go empty corner DHO with Jokic, and Jokic would just, every time guys were going under, and I think he gave him like 1 or 2, and Torrey didn't shoot it. He just kept going. And from that point on, every time Torrey wanted to play with him, Jokic would just send him through and turn it into a post up. But like when you're going through him, you pick it up. I think the coolest thing that Jokic does, and I have some other questions, but the coolest thing he does is it was going on like 18, 19, 19, 20, where the inverted pick and roll with Jamal was really popping off, and it was fun, and Jamal's a great cutter. But I've watched them a lot recently, and it's back. It's back, and it's anybody's allowed to get in the action now. Porter gets in it. Christian gets in it. Jamal's still in it, and it's so fun. And to me, it's one of those things where like he's got like all these little quirks that he can run any single action. He can run it from either the guy that sets the action or is running the action, whether he's shooting it from outside or in the post. Like there's so much versatility that I love to his game. And that action, like 93rd percentile, almost 1.3 points per possession. Like it's such a change up, and it creates such havoc for any team trying to defend it because you can't switch it. He'll shoot it behind. Like there's really fun stuff that he does. But there's one thing that defining the award that I wanted to get into, because I was watching this clip that Jacob sent me from NBA Countdown, and it was Stephen A., Kendra, Perkins, and Bob Myers. And so Bob Myers said, they were talking about the MVP, and Bob Myers said, if I was, and I think this is how MVP should be decided, I think you should give all 30 GMs or decision makers truth serum, and you should tell them nobody will ever know who is the most valuable player, and they should all have to put down one name, no seconds, no thirds, no nothing, just one name, one vote, and whoever comes out with the most wins. But he said, if I'm starting a team and I'm in the playoffs, Jokic is my first pick. And, Perkins said, he's the best player in basketball, but Shea's the MVP. And Stephen A. said the same thing. So I was thinking about this, and I wanted to ask you, A, is Jokic your first pick if you're a team going into the playoffs? And then B, how far down that list is SGA?
All right, so Jokic is my first pick because I think the playoffs are about solving problems. Right. So there's nobody that solves more problems than Jokic. Shea still has things in his game that, the Mavericks kind of showed. Like you can send two at him, and he's not. Him and Booker have the same kind of thing. I think Shea's getting way better at it, but I do think that when you blitz them, you can get them uncomfortable. You can't make Joker uncomfortable. Mm-mm. You're just like triple teams. He's like, all right, fine. Like perfect pass on target, makes it happen. Like you just can't do it. And he'll wait you out sometimes on the double. It's just impossible. So Jokic has to be number one. Like it just has to be. Mm-hmm. I think Shea, that's like a really great question because of the playoff environment, because Shea just doesn't have the reps, right? Like Joker, this is what, his 6th, 7th playoff appearance coming up this year. He's had those moments. Like he went through 2019 when they were playing the Spurs and going up against Pop and what he was just trying to do to him. Mm-hmm. And then the year where he kind of really jumped another level in 2020 with the bubble, and facing the Lakers and learned from that. And he got better from there and the MVP seasons. And so Shea is still, I think, in his playoff career, he's still so young as this guy. And for me, that like you've got to have so many guys that have that experience ahead of him for who you want in the playoffs. What I will say is there's a similarity with him and Giannis in that no matter what you do, Shea is so hard to prevent from getting to his spot. Like you just can't stop him from driving. You just can't. And he's got so many adjustments and counter moves, and his ability to get you out of position so he can draw fouls. People get frustrated by it, but that's one of the counters, right? It's like, okay, if you're going to do these things to stop him from driving, then you have to overplay certain angles, which he takes advantage of. So with Shea, I think he showed last year in that Mav series, he could step up and make those shots. But for me, like I need guys where I know that they can create great offense, and I still have some questions about that. So like Shea's probably between 5 and 10 for me based off of where everybody's at in the league, just based off of the experience factor and those kind of other elements in play.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were talking about Harden, and when I watched Shea, there's so much of Harden that comes to mind in a different way. Harden would try to get you off balance to A, get like step back angles, or B, get downhill, like get across your body angles. For me, Shea does such a wonderful job of switching his hips at the point of attack to mimic where he wants the angles to be and to move you around. And there's something about his footwork when he's facing the basket at the point of attack on any switch or anytime he's getting downhill that's just a gear above where everybody else is in the league when it comes to getting downhill. There's a lot more that I would like to see when it comes to shooting the ball. But I think when it comes to moving people, like you were talking about with Harden, when it comes to moving angles, when it comes to like getting what he's looking for, he's a cut above everybody else when it comes to getting downhill. I did put some names on the list. I'm going to ask you just a few names, and you let me know like where it doesn't have to be in any particular order. But would you want Shea over any of these guys in the playoffs? Giannis?
No.
Luka?
No.
Tatum?
No, because of the defense.
Edwards?
Yes.
All right, there we go. I wasn't expecting that one, but there's a few guys, and I think that's an interesting thing Bob Myers brought up, and I think it's interesting to think about where we stand in terms of voting on the award and being able to say like, yes, obviously that guy's the best player in the world, but he's not the most valuable.
Yeah, and I think I actually lean towards SAS and Kendrick Perkins here from an argument structure standpoint, because I do think GM is because they are involved in like they have bigger things on their minds, right? From a business perspective, they don't think about this stuff as deeply. So they're just like, yeah, it's the best player. When in actuality, like, look, this is where I started. It's a resume award. That's what it is, because we give it out every year, and we give it out for the regular season. We give it out it's voted on at the end of the regular season. And the NBA is very purposeful in not providing instructions because all this conversation is what they want. Right?
Yeah.
And I would love it if we added like playoff MVP, because I think there's a lot of like really interesting cases of like, God, this guy was amazing, but he only made it 2 rounds.
Yeah.
Was his 2 rounds better than somebody, those kind of questions are great for me from a content perspective, but I get why they don't. We just have finals MVP. But like for me, I have no other way to consider it other than the games start in October and they go through April. And we vote at the end of April based off of what we've seen from October through April. And the regular season is different from the playoffs, because the only alternative, because we we index the playoffs so highly because that is winning time, right? But you would have to basically throw out these 82 games and guys that have done and put in the work. So that's where the Shea argument does get really good, because you're like, look, he has been an absolutely phenomenal. He is not the best defender on his team, but he's been awesome defensively. Shea contributes to their defensive success. He's been awesome offensively. Like, he's averaging 30 a game, great efficiency, 6 and 6. Like, they have a top 10 offense. Like, all of these things are in alignment for, and like they've won. When Shea's been on the court, they have beaten their opponent by more than when Joker's been on the court for the Nuggets. Like, that's a fact. You can argue the whys and whats, and that's what makes the conversation fun. But there is a resume standpoint of Shea's performance has led them to substantially more wins by more points than Joker has. And that's a good argument for Shea in the MVP race.
Yeah. All right. I want to go one more big one, and this is a little bit more historical. You're a historian of this award, and you've been following it for so long. You've been involved in voting. So when I look back, are there any in the modern era that you look at and you're like, man, we got that one wrong?
Oh boy.
And if there's multiple, give me the top and maybe the second.
Yeah. All right. So the first one I think off the top is wrong is too hard of a take. I think this is the thing, is like there are almost no instances that I can identify where I would say this player was not worthy of MVP.
Okay. That's a good start. Yeah. And like, also this is like splitting hairs. These guys are absolutely incredible. This is
So instead it just kind of comes down to like, who would you have voted for, right? And I voted in 2017. I voted Harden over Russ. And there were great cases that season for LeBron, Kawhi, Russ, and Harden. And I voted Harden in that one. And so for me, The biggest thing in that season was that Russ's contributions. Russ wasn't the defender that Shea is this season. He just wasn't. He took his foot off the pedal defensively for years, and that's okay because he was bearing such an incredible offensive workload.
Mm-hmm.
But the Thunder offense wasn't good, and like that's a big category for me. Is like, what do you if you're because like this is a good thing with I think to consider with Giannis right now. Like the Bucks defense is only pretty good. It's not bad, just pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but if a big chunk of Giannis's contributions are on the defensive end, and the defense is only pretty good, then that impact isn't as high. And the Thunder offense was not good that season. So you had Russ contributing all of this. And the counter argument is like, yeah, without him, they would have been horrible. They would have been bottom. They would have been the worst offense in the league. But I'm like, all right. But again, I focus on what happened when you were on the court. Did you do enough when you were on the court? And Russ didn't raise everybody up enough. So 2017, I think, is a starting point where I do feel confident in my vote that I do believe Harden was the best choice. I think Kawhi was also a really good one. I had Russ third on that list. Based off of that. The other one I would probably go to, Rose is an easy one. It gets kind of lost because everyone's like, oh, everyone just hated LeBron that season.
Yeah.
LeBron struggled that year, man. Like he did. He had games where he really struggled to kind of find his way.
This is year one in Miami, right?
Yeah. They didn't know what they were doing yet.
Yeah.
Like they were still trying to figure out how to play together. They hadn't stumbled upon a small ball.
Yeah.
They were still trying to get everybody on the same page. It was a lot of my turn, your turn. And ultimately, like LeBron just wasn't – I don't think that LeBron was all that great, but I do think that Dwight Howard actually had a remarkably great case that season for MVP. I would point towards Dwight in 2011 probably for being the one that deserved it then. I actually would go to 2021 and go to Jokic. I thought Giannis should have won that year. I think Giannis had a 3-year stretch where I think Giannis was the guy.
Yeah.
And I think that 2021 season, I still kind of wind up back on him. When you look at kind of the seeding stuff and how everything worked out, I think Giannis in 21 or 22 should have won one of those. And then historically, I don't have a lot of arguments with the ones historically. I think some people will point at Moses. And I'm like, I think Moses gets a bad rap for how much he dominated in terms of just being able to, like, you just couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
You just couldn't stop him physically. He was so good in those areas.
An outlier. He was an outlier.
Yeah, he really was.
Is there the MJ of it all? Is there any reason why it wasn't MJ every single year that MJ was at his peak? And watching The Last Dance, is it maybe even better that it wasn't MJ every single year? Did we luck out as fans giving MJ some juice to get him going for certain things?
Yeah, I think so, because it kept him motivated, and I think that's such a big deal. I don't think you can argue with Barkley in '93. He was go back and just watch the stuff. I mean, it was insane. Barkley was so great that season. That Suns team was so good and just could not do anything because of Jordan. 97 Malone was definitely exhaustion, and that's okay. Like that's okay to admit that it was exhaustion. I have a hard time with Malone just because one, there's all the other stuff around him, but I do think that. In general, there's probably like an argument that Malone and Stockton were so good together consistently that it wasn't a horrible pick. It's just like, how do you not give it to, like, I just don't know how in that stretch you don't give it to Jordan. Barkley, I think was on the level, but yeah, I think it had to be MJ in '97.
Yeah. Damn. Well, this has been incredible. You're a historian of the award. We're incredibly lucky that you agreed to hop on and educate us about the back end of it, what we're looking at this year, and where this comes down to. And you don't have a vote this year, so feel free to give us your inside info before you've done your deep dive. Where do you feel like it seems like a 2-horse race. It doesn't feel like Giannis can really get involved in it unless they go on some incredible tear. So in these SGA and Jokic down the stretch battle, where do you stand currently right now? And is there anything that you feel like once you get into it could really pop for you?
Joker has to be it right now because he's having arguably the greatest offensive season of all time. I talked about what do you do on court. Here's like the facts, the numbers, okay? When Joker's on court, minimum number of usage, right? You've got the 20% usage rate. The Nuggets have the highest offensive rating in the league when Joker's on the court. Shea's close. but that's like the fact is if both these guys primarily contribute on offense, and they do, I think Shea's defense is light years better than Jokic's. Jokic's defense this year has been worse than normal, I think. And Shea's has been amazing, but Shea is still the fourth defender on his team. He doesn't get the hardest assignments. He's not asked to do as much. There are ways you can take advantage of him, just like you can take advantage of Joker. And Joker's offensive contributions at this level are too high. Mm-hmm. If Joker slides at all, I think it's got to be Shea. Okay. He's got to keep this level up for another 40 games. And if he gets there, it's going to be really hard. Like, again, I just asked the question of, there's this, if he's 30-10-10, 47% from three, third in steals, all these things, and the Nuggets win 55 games or 53 games, how is it not him? And the answer is, if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander leads the league in scoring for a team that wins 68 games, how is he not the MVP?
Yeah.
And that question is what's going to be really fun to watch down the stretch.
Yeah, and you're in this. The action stuff is behind you. You're deep in the lines. Like it has seemed like over the past couple of weeks, the line has shifted in Vegas so drastically towards Shai.
Yeah, and it's been an overreaction. An important thing to always look at when you're looking at the numbers, because people do this, where they're like, even like colleagues in writing, I try and help gently. Is there's this idea of like, well, he's the favorite. Like, okay. See, he's the favorite because they're adjusting it based off of their perception, but more importantly, because the money that's come in. So people have bet Shai, so his number has deepened.
Yeah,
people will come back, and you notice there was a plus 420 for Joker out there last week. It got hammered into oblivion, and it's back to 220. So you're going to see that fluctuation throughout the rest of the season.
Do you think the straw poll? That is it Bontemps that does it? Do you think the straw poll moves the numbers a ton? And how many of those voters are they all the MVP voters?
No. So most of the what it is what Tim does is he chooses people that approximate them. So there are voters that are in it, but there's a lot of voters that decline or he doesn't have contact with or whatever. And so it's like an approximation of what an average voter looks like. Like I'm in the straw poll. And so there's a lot of folks that don't have votes that are in the straw poll, but there's a lot of folks that do have votes that are in the straw poll. It gives you a very good idea. What's interesting about the betting perspective is the last time that Joker took number one, the market went the other way, which is a very like sharp indication move of, okay, there's this overreaction to Joker. So Shai has to have value. And now Shai is leading in this. So I'm going to be very curious to see what the All-Star straw poll says, because I do think it's going to be pretty tight the next time the straw poll comes out.
So there's in my small betting mind, you think there's a lot of smart people that are in win-win situations here based on how the market's gone.
Yeah. I mean, the best advice, we talked about this on my betting podcast Buckets last night. The best thing is bet whoever's the dog. You're getting Joker at plus 220. It's a good bet right now because he's probably going to be the favorite at some point, and Shai's going to dip to a plus number, and then you can get Shai at plus 120, plus 150, plus 200, and then you bet on Shai, and then you're just adding these both sides angles of it to go back and forth. Because to me, this is a two-man race, and everybody else on that board is just they have to factor those possibilities in, and there's no chance, I don't think, for any of those guys.
Yeah, man. Well, so cool, Matt Moore from Locked On. You're on Locked On, you're on Substack, you're on Twitter. Anybody that wants to troll, you're ready to beat them back down on Twitter. It's one of the coolest things. You're fighting the good fight on there. Thank you so much for hopping on. Everything you do, we really love, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me, man.
All right, Matt. Have a good one.